Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Grove Show. My name is Bernard Alvarez, and today will be part one of our 4 week series on the season of the witch. Yes, it is that time of year again, and this year I decided I wanted to do something a little bit different than what I normally do. Usually around this time of year, people, of course, become more fascinated with witchcraft and wizardry and Halloween and Samhain and magic and spells and ghosts and the paranormal and whatnot. And in the past, those of you who have been around for a few years know that in the past, I usually do some type of a Wicca 101 type thing this time of year. However, this year I decided to do things a little bit differently. I wanted to take more of a personal approach, share with you my story, share with you my practices, my beliefs uh, over the next several weeks. So, let me tell you a little bit about the Season of the Witch series before I get started with today's topic, which, by the way, today's topic is why did I become a witch? Uh, Next week, we are going to be covering on the 18th. If you're watching live, we will be covering the psychology and philosophy of witchcraft. Then on the 25th, we will be performing a interactive Samhain ceremony, Halloween ceremony, for those of you that don't know Gaelic terminology, that we can all do together live here as a community. Then, being that I did not get to start the series last week due to unforeseen circumstances, I was ill, and so I'm going to extend it through to November 1st, which is going to be the art of spell casting. The good news is that on first of all, let me say that I celebrate two Halloweens. What do I mean by that? I like to celebrate the secular Halloween, with the Halloween party and the trick or treaters and all that. And as well, I do celebrate the actual cross quarter day of Samhain. And I'll get a little bit closer. I'll get a little bit more in depth with that as we move through either today's talk or throughout the series over the next coming weeks. But needless to say, this year, Samhain does fall on November 7th. And just for those of you that are interested in what that means, it is the cross quarter day between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. And that is where Samhain comes along. Again, we'll get more in depth on those, the beliefs and the reasoning why that is celebrated as such an important holiday for those of us who practice the pagan path. Anyway, let me go over here and open up my chat so I can see you all. I see Venom Doll is there on YouTube. It's very nice to see you. And hello, GMB, who is also watching us on YouTube. Hello, everyone, and blessed Samhain and Halloween season to all of you. Or shall I say, season of the witch. So, I like to do a reading from my book, and my book isn't necessarily a pagan book, even though a lot of my beliefs and my philosophies stem from the book that I wrote, the Book of One. Those of you can see it. And I wanted to read something today because there is. Oh, before I even go any further, let me do the disclaimer. What I'm sharing with you today, what I'm sharing with you over the next several weeks during this season of the witch series that I am doing, are my own personal beliefs and philosophy. I am sure there are many people that are going to nitpick about what's right or wrong, that their coven doesn't do it like that, or that book didn't teach them like that. And that's all fine and dandy. For me, I believe it is about our personal path. And that is why I chose today's reading, which is in the new section of the Book of One. And it's called The Personal Path. Your path is your own. It is not what you've been told, taught, or identify with. Learn to listen to your higher self and find the courage to act on it. And that is a great starting point for today's talk. Today's talk being, why did I become a witch? So I'm going to take you back a little bit to my birth. I will be sharing a lot of personal facts and factoids that you may or may not have heard me talk about in the past. But just so you know, I was raised in Miami, Florida by a Cuban household. I am adopted. As you can probably tell, I am Native American and Irish and a little bit of German. So it's very fitting that I landed and fell into the ways of modern witchcraft, shamanism, and etc. Earth spirituality. I like to call it as an umbrella term. But growing up, um, I seem to have had, and I remember as a small child. I'm not going to get into much anecdotes, but during my time as a small child, I experienced a lot of paranormal events within my life. Everything from foretelling the future in my dreams to intuitively picking up a deck of cards and learning how to do readings with a plain deck of playing cards. I've had experiences with those who had moved on, ancestors that had passed on coming to visit me, ancestors from my adopted family, I will say. So, not only that, I grew up in a Cuban household in Miami, and lo and behold, I was surrounded with the sights, the smells of Cuban witchcraft, as many of you might know as Santeria. My family itself did not, well, some members did, but my immediate family did not practice. Though, but my mother did have the statues of Santa Barbara and putting apples in front of it and spraying perfume on her and spraying that same perfume on me for protection before I went to school. And so magic was kind of a part of our culture growing up with a Latino family in Miami. And not only that, I was raised Catholic and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved the ritual, I loved the incense. I loved the ritual of the transmutation of the body and blood of Christ. And I just found all of it so mysterious and mesmerizing. I love the scenes inside the Catholic Church with all the stained glass, and our particular church was built in a circle, very fitting for a future witch, was built in a circle with a stone altar and a skylight, shining sunlight right onto the altar. It was, I mean, it would make a great pagan temple. To this day, it still stands, and if I had the money, I would buy it and turn it into a beautiful pagan temple. But so I was mesmerized by all of it. I loved it. And I don't know if it was because I grew up in a Cuban household, but I had a really strong affinity for Mother Mary. She was the one I talked to. She was the one I prayed to. Yeah, God was there. Yeah, Jesus was there. But I felt a relationship to Mother Mary. So that should have been my first hint. As I got a little bit older, and I'm talking about 6, 7, 8 years old, I found myself drawn to the Egyptian folklore. And maybe it was around the time, I'm aging myself here, that the Tutankhamun artifacts were being toured around the US. I guess it was in the 70s or whatnot. And I just found myself so drawn to it. To this day, well, I just got a new Ankh with an Eye of Horus, my Halloween gift to myself. And I was just always very drawn to it for some strange reason. And I'll share this little anecdote with you that one day my father told me the story when I was much older, probably when I started studying witchcraft. I think it was in my early 20s and going to college, and I wrote a term paper, a research paper on witchcraft, and he was so proud of me. But he told me this anecdote of when I was a small child. He said I couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall. That he was working in the backyard in his workshop, and he was looking for me, and he couldn't find me. And he turned the corner around the side of the house, and apparently I had dug a hole. He said it had to be 6 feet deep. and that I was getting ready to hit water, which in Florida is about 5 or 6 feet. You'll hit water. And he said, "What are you doing, son?" And I said, "I'm looking for Isis." And in my hand, I had a rock that I wrote the name Isis on it and wrapped it in a paper. And I just wanted to bury this rock in this giant hole that I dug. Anyway, I don't personally remember it. This was something he told me. Again, I was only like 6 years old or whatnot. But you can see where the natural affinity and the I guess the natural instinct to follow this path had been innate within me. At least that's how I feel about it. I feel it was very innate within me. As I got older, I was always drawn to the occult section of the library. We did not have Amazon. We did not have online books or anything like that at the time. And every time the school went on a field trip to the library, we were supposed to be researching or doing a report or something. You would always find me in the occult section, and I would check out all the occult books that I could find. And eventually, I love this. Eventually, I don't know if y'all remember. Well, I guess it's still around, the National Enquirer. In the back of the National Enquirer, there was always this ad that said "Learn witchcraft now" and whatnot. And somehow I like saved up the money and I sent in my self-addressed stamped envelope with the money order, and I got the book. I don't remember what it was called, but apparently I know who the authors are now. I didn't know who they were then. It was Gavin and Yvonne Frost. It was a book on learning witchcraft. I was probably about 13 years old. And I read through it, and quite honestly, I didn't vibe with it. I know now, looking back, that the Frosts practice a more patriarchal version of witchcraft, which is fine if that's what you're into. But I did not align with it. Um, so I continued with my learning. I thought I was going to become a priest. I went to CCD, got my confirmation. I went to Catholic Mass every morning, almost every morning before school in the little chapel on the side of the building at, I think it was like a 6 a.m. Mass before school. My school started at 9 o'clock, so it was a little bit later than most high schools. But I loved going to Mass before school. Again, there was something about that ritual, the incense, the candles, the robes, the stoles and the lights and the colors and everything that I was just very, very drawn to. And I just didn't know why, because I didn't really align with the beliefs of the church. I did not believe in salvation and all these other things. I definitely did not believe in sin. As a matter of fact, I lied about going to confession every Sunday when I got the communion. I was like, "Oh, did you go to, you're supposed to go to confession." I never went to. I went once for my CCD, and that was about it because I had to, and the teacher was watching. But of course, at this time, I was leaning into puberty, 12, 13 years old. And I started having the inklings and the realization that I was probably gay. That also was a big thing for me and the church. It was like, yeah, we're not going to get along. We are not going to. Oh, I'm going to go to hell. And I'm going to share a very extreme story when it comes to that and the beliefs and what they did to me as I move on a little bit. But later on, it's fair to say me and the Catholic Church kind of parted ways at about the time I was like 13 or 14. I got really into like Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne and, had all the Ozzy posters. Blizzard of Oz was like the greatest album in the world to me. And so that just didn't go with what the teachings of the church were doing, and it just didn't work for me. So we did part ways. Time went on, and one of the things that you have to understand with me, growing up in a Cuban household, growing up in a Catholic household, and growing up questioning my sexuality, is I was torn to shreds on the inside. I did fall in love with someone that was very close to me, a friend that was very close to me. And by the time I was 16, I had my first same-sex experience. And I was so devastated. I was very, very devastated and very depressed and very ashamed and very guilty. And I had run away to be with this person and had my experience during a runaway episode. And my parents found me, and when they brought me home, I literally was so scared I was going to go to hell. I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to die and burn in hell anyway. And I attempted suicide. So that was how much of a conflict it created within me. As you can see, I'm still here. I'm fine, and I'm healthier than ever. Well, as healthy as someone who lives in our modern world can be psychologically. It's not to say I don't have my own emotional issues I'm dealing with to this very day. However, that kind of put the nail in the coffin for Christianity with me. It was like, what kind of organization is going to tell me I'm going to burn in hell? Who are these people? I'm not a bad person. I'm a very good person. And around that time, my parents kind of figured out that I was smoking weed. Ooh, evil, evil, evil weed. And they had put me in rehab. So I thought my father had actually sent me to gay conversion therapy under the guise of marijuana. And so I did think I had a drug problem. I was like, ooh, marijuana is evil. And I ended up going to Narcotics Anonymous over it. I was in Narcotics Anonymous for about 2 or 3 years. And it was during this time in Narcotics Anonymous, we're talking, I was about 18, 19 by this point, and I had already moved from Miami to Clearwater and living in Dunedin, Florida, that I had met some of the guys in NA that were interested in witchcraft. And I was like, cool, I've always been interested in witchcraft. And we ended up going to, I forgot the name of the bookstore back then. I want to say it was Barnes and Noble or Borders or something like that. And I went into the bookstore and I followed my intuition with it. Let's just put it that way. And I picked up a book called Wicca for the Solitary Practitioner by Scott Cunningham. I didn't know what to expect. I did feel that, well, I'm not in a coven. I want to learn this. I want to become initiated in the practice. And I started reading it, and within the first couple chapters, Scott starts talking about the goddess and all the attributes of the goddess and what the goddess means in our society, what it means in our culture, what it means in pagan belief or Wiccan belief. At this time, I guess I did consider myself leaning into Wicca. I do not consider myself a Wiccan anymore. But it was a great start for me, and it created a very strong foundation for my present practices. So it really felt like this was it. I was like, wow, a goddess and a god, a mother and a father. Now, at this time, I was still conflicted about leaving the Catholic Church, and I was still afraid of going to hell. So my altar consisted of a picture of Jesus and a picture of Mary. I was like, okay, the mother and the father. Let me just play it safe just in case, I'm wrong about all of this. I don't want to end up burning in hell. And by the way, I will say there are a lot of Christo-pagans out there, and that is a real path. And by all means, if that works for you, go ahead and do it. It's all about imagery, energy, and the psychology that you use to align with the feminine divine and masculine divine. However, while I was living in Dunedin, and I won't go too much into this because it's all in my book, and I've told the story over and over again, this next part, but we formed a small coven, a little coven in my neighborhood with other fellow like-minded folks. We, of course, because of my calling toward the Egyptian, we set up an Egyptian temple in my spare bedroom. I had a 2-bedroom bungalow off downtown Dunedin. And one day, we had a new landlord. I was like, oh, great. And he's like, well, we're going to redo the plumbing and this and that. And I'm like, oh my gosh. He's like, by the way, I went in your room back there. He's like, what's going on back there? I was like, I got all defensive. I'm like, religious rights and whatnot. He's like, I think it's magnificent. He's like, do you practice shamanism? You're Native American, aren't you? I'm like, well, my mother said I am. My father said I'm not. I didn't really find out for sure until after my father died. But and especially now, I got the DNA done last year. However, he was a practicing a shamanic practitioner, and his family was Algonquin. He was, of course, very mixed race himself. And he's like, I've got a full library for you to check out on shamanism and witchcraft and all this stuff. So he ended up being my first, I guess, I don't want to say formal teacher, someone who was teaching me outside of reading lots of books. Up until that time, I was strictly a book witch. And the coven stead grew. We ended up having, I believe, about 4 or 5 families in the neighborhood who were practicing with me on a monthly basis, practicing the rituals out of Scott Cunningham's book. I went on to get the complete book of witchcraft by Raymond Buckland, went through that workbook meticulously. And as well, my shamanic teacher was having me do homework and write essays and research papers and whatnot. And I share one of those research papers with you regularly. And that's the first one was that he had me write was what's the difference between shamanism and schizophrenia, which I giggled. I'm like, what are you talking about? But as I did the research, it's like a controlled schizophrenia, but that's here nor there. And you can watch that video in my library and in the archives. So that was kind of how I don't want to say fell into it, but how my path evolved. I decided after Hurricane Andrew to move back to Miami to support my family. Thank goodness the day I moved in was the day they got electricity back. But I wanted to be there for them. I wanted to be back there for my community. As you can imagine, right now with Hurricane Ian, that was how bad South Florida was. And I wanted to help with supporting my community. And when I was down there, I answered an ad to join a Wiccan coven. And I met a high priestess who was so lovely. She was a French woman who I want to say she practiced Italian witchcraft. I'm not quite sure the way of Strega. But she was the official real first high priestess that I met. And we went through all the rituals, and actually no, she didn't do that many rituals. I take that back. And out of that frustration, I became very good friends with one of the students in her coven. And we decided to branch out on our own and start our own coven. And her name is Lady Raven. You all might know her. She's been around for decades. I don't know if she's practicing anymore. I look for her now and online. I don't see her, but she was a big deal back in the day for other things besides witchcraft. I won't get into that. But we ended up starting a really freaking huge coven on South Beach. She lived on South Beach. So we would practice in her apartment once a month. We'd have the full moon. We would do teaching classes every week. And at one point, I believe for our first Samhain ceremony, we counted something like 80 people, which I thought was pretty wild for what I considered shallow, fashion-based, South Beach. But it was amazing how starved people were looking for a spirituality that was more earth-based and made sense for them. So throughout the years, I kind of dropped the. By the way, during this time in Dunedin, I got to backtrack a little bit. That's when I had my shamanic vision quest and wrote my book. So that's just a little footnote for all of you. And I talk about that experience and how I built up to that in the book, as well as the information that my guides gave me. But it is, and I bring that up now because it is because of the information upon meeting my guides and this overwhelming uh, overwhelming amount of information that was given to me in that shamanic journey that it was very hard for me to put a label on my beliefs and my practices. Uh, I found that through my journaling that I connected and aligned most with pagan spirituality. I aligned most with shamanic spirituality. And now, as I've gotten older, I can look back and say, my goodness, a lot of that shamanic belief and practice really aligned more with what I had learned from my guides. I found that to be very interesting, looking back on that now. Oh my goodness, I am just talking a mile a minute. It's already 25 after. I'm gonna go. I might be running a little late today, guys. We might extend the show by a few minutes. But anyway, so after that, I moved to. We kind of disbanded the South Beach group. There was unfortunately, some witch war stuff going on, as most, unfortunately, when you get a large organization, that kind of conflict comes up. Due to some personal things, I will say that I decided to leave that group. I don't think they practiced anymore. We were called the Circle of Divine Light. So I decided to start the Circle of Divine Light in Hollywood when I moved up there after my father had passed away. And I left the family home. I moved up to Hollywood, Florida. And with this group, I got involved with the Unitarian Fellowship of South Florida up there, and they had a cups group. And I loved it. That was my first, how should I say, public group that I was affiliated with. The minister there, Rel Davis, was the leader of the group. He taught me so much. He was an excellent teacher. But he also, I think the most important thing he taught me was about eclectic witchcraft. And that's kind of when the world opened up to me. At that point, I was starting to meet elders in the community. I was starting to meet leaders in the South Florida, witch and pagan and shamanic community. I was meeting authors, and they were coming to speak. We met, what's the name of that woman? Margot Adler came down and talked at our church, drawing down the moon. I got to meet her. We had we had several wonderful local Wiccan shops in the area. Got to meet so many more high priestesses and high priests. And I also met through my husband's brother's friends, met members of the OTO and the Golden Dawn. And I was very drawn to that. I had this thing about high magic and pagan magic, and I just wanted to learn everything. And that's how I got involved with ceremonial magic, which is kind of what I practice the most these days. But so I did go through much Golden Dawn training. No, I never made it to the higher echelons. I think I stopped at, I already forgot how you call it, Episimus or something like that. But I did make it to that level. I had been invited to join OTO and Thelema and all that, and I just did not feel comfortable with the structure of it. I wanted to be eclectic. So once I've completed most of my ceremonial magic training, I brought it into my coven in the Circle of Divine Light, my Hollywood coven. And we actually book studied Donald Michael Craig's Modern Magic book. And we went through all the lessons, and I used that as my guide with this group. And we did some really wonderful work. The group itself saved my butt from some very scary legal situations I had going on at the time, some unresolved, pot stuff when it was still illegal. And their work really expedited dealing with those kinds of issues and having my record expunged, et cetera, et cetera. But the group was getting more and more serious, and my high priestess had completed my training, and I was at the point where I was like, you know what? I you're teaching me now. It's your turn to take this group over. And so I kind of just like backed off a little bit until I mean, I practiced as a solitaire for a while. In this time, I will say I met some lovely people at the Renaissance Fair. Going to the Renaissance Fair was like I felt like I was at Woodstock for witches, or as I like to call it, Witch Stock. And I met some great leaders, other leaders in the pagan community, and they had this wonderful group that I guess is a coven, for lack of a better term, and they call it the Tapestry. Now, this was so cool. All of us were high priests and high priestess in our own right, in our own covens or groups or groves or orders or whatnot. And we would meet and perform our ceremonies simultaneously at one time. So let's say on one end, I'm practicing the Egyptian rites of Isis. On the other hand, I have someone practicing Thelemic. On the other hand, I have somebody practicing Thulic. On the other one, we have someone doing Babylonian. So it was like we were doing these ceremonies simultaneously, and just the energy was just absolutely fascinating. And to this day, well, I love all the members of all the covens I've been in, but I hold a high regard, especially for the Thulic priest, who was, I consider him a mentor. I believe he was younger than me, but I still considered him a mentor. He had so much knowledge and taught me so much, especially in the way of the runes and Thule and all that Thelemic, not Thelemic, I'm sorry, Thulemic, for lack of a better term, Nordic practices. But so yeah, I moved up here, and I moved here to Roanoke, Virginia, with a big giant pentagram on the mountain looking down over the city, and started my own group. After a while, I wandered in and out of different classes and whatnot, and I met this lovely young woman who, was like, "We really should start a coven." And I'm like, "You know what? Let's do that." And that's when we started the Star Mountain Grove, and we were very formal for a couple of years. Ever since, actually, prior to COVID, my consistency due to my busy schedule with you guys and doing all this work and getting clients and teaching around town and teaching workshops at different venues, I had to kind of back off a little bit. But we do still meet for some of the main holidays. Well, of course, we'll be meeting for Samhain. Last time we did meet for ritual was during the summer solstice. But we still hang out. I had them over a couple of nights ago to watch Hocus Pocus 2. My sister witches from my coven were there with me. And, we still bounce ideas off each other. And I'm always there to answer questions for them. And that's kind of where I am now. So why do I call myself a witch when I'm a Native American and I practice ceremonial magic? I've always felt connected to that word. It was when I read the definition, at least it's Scott Cunningham's definition, how it comes from the Celtic word for wise one, or the path of the wise. And Hollywood and satanic panic and all that kind of stuff kind of skewed and perverted the definition, but the reality of it is the word stands for wise one. And actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Wiche is the male and Wicca is the female version of wise one, and the path of the wise, within the path of the wise. Of course, during all this time, I did become an ordained minister. I am a licensed minister here in the state of Virginia. As well, I became a Reiki master. I got my certification as a doctor of metaphysics. That's a whole nother story. My philosophy professor told me, don't waste your money on a college degree on philosophy and metaphysics. You're better off getting an online certification, which is what I did. So I got my doctor of metaphysics, and I love doing what I do. I love doing what I do. You know, it's interesting that when I started this path, this magical path, I was doing it for me to align with a spirituality that felt right for me. You know, again, maybe I was feeling that Native American connection to Earth and the moon and the plants and the animals, and I had always been a very eco activist oriented, and you know, wanting to connect with the cycles of the moon and the sun even before I knew what it all meant. So it makes sense to me to be on this path. I guess I still call myself an eclectic pagan. I use that as an umbrella term that kind of encompasses everything. But why did I become a witch? Because it was right for me. In that first book that I read by Scott Cunningham, he says, and I love what he says here about this. He says, the goddess calls those back to her altar who have been there before. Some paraphrasing, paraphrasing. And that's where I feel most at home, is at the altar of the goddess, working with the goddess. And yes, if you're wondering, I do work with Isis, most Aset, excuse me. I use Isis for commonality's sake, so y'all understand who I'm talking about. But yes, I do pray and work with Set. We'll get into the philosophy of what I see gods as. I'll give you a hint. It's not the way the Catholic Church sees it. I do lean more into the Kemetic philosophy of divinity. And we'll get more into that next week when I discuss the philosophy and psychology of witchcraft. Anyway, I sure hope that I shared enough with you to kind of get a handle on why I call myself a witch. How did I become a part of this path? And again, disclaimer, what's right for me may not be right for you. What I went through may not be what you went through or will go through. I just wanted to share with you some primer of understanding of what it is for me and why it means so much to me. Anyway, let me say hello to a few of y'all before we sign off. I'm seeing so many comments I didn't have a chance to check out. Oh, Sandra on YouTube says, I can relate with your story 70%. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. Um, Reverend, I'm eclectic solitary 30 plus years now. I can feel you. I can feel you. Thank you, Venom Doll, for sharing that. You're very welcome. I'm very grateful to share that with you. And there are no babies, there are only fledglings, Tristan. One day, too, you will be an elder like me. Feels weird to say elder, but yeah, I'm that old. I'm an elder in the craft now. But anyway, so thank you so much. And Neon Cicada, I am so glad you are. Be proud of who you are. It's your path. Live it as you must, express it as you must. I will leave you with this. And I used to have this, I made like a cardboard poster of it in my house when I first started learning. And it's a saying that I still hold true to this day, especially if you become my apprentice. I hold this over your head. To practice witchcraft, you have to practice witchcraft. Not read about it, not think about it. You have to practice it. Practicing the rituals, practicing the rites, practicing the spells, practicing the meditations, and eventually practicing it in the way you see, feel, and interact with the world. I love you, everybody. I will see you next week. Please, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If you haven't hit the notification button and you're not seeing my posts, because you have to hit that little bell on YouTube. Same thing on Facebook. I think you have to do that bell notification, something to that effect. As well, please consider becoming a monthly contributor. You can do it on Facebook, on YouTube. I guess they call it subscribe on YouTube. I guess they call it maybe subscribe on Facebook or become a fan. I don't know. Anyway, it's like $2 or $3 a month, or you can choose your level on Patreon. It helps me to cover the cost of all of this. And by all means, please know that I am here for you. You are able to book appointments with me, whether you want to have a reading, whether you just need, 45 minutes of sitting down and getting one-on-one lessons and magic, paganism, witchcraft, shamanism, Reiki, whatever. I am thinking about doing a Reiki course online, but I haven't quite gotten around to doing the outline for it. So you might be seeing that in the future. I love to do healing. And anyway, so that'll be all for today. And again, let me remind you all of the schedule. Next week, the 18th, we'll be doing psychology and philosophy of witchcraft. On the 25th, yes, I know it's early. Why do I do it early? Because I want you to have the video in case you want to be able to do it either on secular Halloween or on Samhain, or if you just want to do it a few more times. Someone said to me the other day, I posted something. I posted Happy Samhain a week or so back, and someone corrected me. Samhain is on the 31st and ends on the 1st. I'm like, well, actually, Samhain's on the 7th. For me, Samhain starts the day after the autumn equinox, and I do celebrate all month long. So anyway, that's why I do the Samhain ceremony a little bit early, so you have a copy in case you want to do it at a later date through the week of Samhain. Well, leading up to the day of Samhain. I love you. Oh wait, the last one, I didn't say that, did I? The last one will be November 1st, which is also election day in the United States, I believe. So, is it? Wait, I need to do the please go vote thing. Yep, November 1st is election day, so go vote. Or is it the 8th? My bad. Don't listen to me. As far as that, the semantics of that. I love you. Have a very, very wonderful week. I will see you next week for the psychology and philosophy of witchcraft. I love you, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Thank you.